excited to welcome you to this all access briefing. Emmy has competed in cross country and track and field as an NCAA D1 scholarship athlete at Tulane University, graduated from Columbia University with her doctorate in physical therapy, and now operates her own PT practice with a focus on prehab, performance, and women's health. And last of all, is now a published author of the book Run Healthy: The Runner's Guide to Injury Prevention and Treatment. So, a perfect person to have on to kind of talk about our theme today, which is about some of the recovery modalities that are now popular in the market. So, Emmy, thank you as always for being here. Always a pleasure to chat.
Thanks so much, John. Thanks so much for that amazing intro. It sounds quite nice on paper. Um,
I think it's pretty nice in
Happy to be
reality.
here.
Well, we'll jump right in here because there's a lot to pack. And
Yeah.
kind of the tricky thing with you being a very successful practitioner is I'm sure you have all like more patients throughout the day as well. So we'll try to be efficient with their time.
Awesome.
So I'm sure it is absolutely no mystery to you, no mystery to anyone who's been around the community for even a short period of time. The recovery industry has gone from itty bitty to multi-billion-dollar industry in the past, I would say, 10 years or so. It was something we were definitely not talking about when you and I were running with the Whippets as younger runners, and it's something that
Totally.
we're talking about all the time nowadays. So I kind of want to start with some of the most traditional modalities, things that have been around a little bit, because I think there's still some things that we could probably unpack. And the first thing I was going to start with is foam rolling. So
hmm
been around, we're familiar with it. I think most people probably have one, whether they use it or not. So kind of let's start off of if you don't if you would talk a little bit about like what it's beneficially used for, like what you're incorporating it with for your patients in a physical therapy practice, and we'll go from
Yeah. Again, I'll kind of reference. I think a lot of what we're going to be talking about is going to be. You can look at the research and kind of the evidence based kind of take on things, and then there is also kind of like what I see day to day in the clinic, working with patients, and also with myself and with my friends who I run with. And there is a little bit of like a lag there. For example, foam rolling. Like foam rolling has in some studies been kind of debunked as like it doesn't really do that much, and you can make a very strong argument that it doesn't, but I would say on a day-to-day basis I am a huge advocate of foam rolling. I see it with a lot of my patients. I feel it with myself, my own recovery and stuff like that, that it is in my mind, I think it's more important than from a soft tissue maintenance perspective. I think it can be useful for warming up for a run and kind of getting your body loose and ready to go, and also a really, really great tool of like for recovery. There's logic and thought behind the use of it, but there's also out there that'll say it's really not doing that much. Um, but kind of the way that I see it, using it for like a few minutes pre-exercise on those kind of areas that tend to be like a little bit more of like your problem areas. If your calves are always really tight, or like kind of that IT band, especially in the winter as we're kind of entering these colder, where like our tissue, our fascia, our connective tissue is stiffer. If it's colder, like your tissue, that is going to affect you physically. Like your body is going to be a little bit stiffer. Using that to kind of mobilize things, warm things up from a blood flow those areas can be really helpful before you get into your dynamic mobility activation stuff, things like that, all in theory doing free run. And also really, really great for recovery, kind of that compression that you get through the muscles. Like once you stop exercising, if you don't do an extended and quite honestly pretty long cool down, you're still gonna get some kind of like byproduct of the hard work that you did, like lactic acid, cellular discharge, venous flow, like your body's basically like shunting tons of blood to your extremities with gravity, right? And then it has to go up against gravity back to your heart to get reoxygenated. And a lot of times get a little bit of like stagnation or like pooling in the extremity. So the foam roller can help to kind of like help with the blood flow by compressing on the muscle. You're essentially like squeezing it or kind of like wringing it out, like imagine like a sponge,
Mhm.
kind of wring out a sponge. Then you put it back into water, right? It absorbs like fresh water, clean water. And that's kind of what we're recreating with the foam roller. And it can also be really helpful for like neuro inhibition. So say again, say you just your calves are always tight or your quads are always tight. Maybe we're overworking that muscle a little bit. Foam rolling helps to kind of send a signal to our brain to like down regulate that area. So it'll actually help those muscles that are like contracting to like relax and like release and sort of shift from like that like very sympathetic turned on to go to more of like a rest and digest like recovery mode.
Uh, Amazing. Yes, that it's funny. I was going to ask like when and where to incorporate it, but you kind of hit all of those things. I think maybe actually I have nothing to add because that's more information than I've ever known. So, I would be curious. You alluded to, there's so much to do both in a warm up and a cool down,
Mhm.
right? Of like, if you were going into, let's just say your kind of key workout of the week, and you're trying to figure out, where to include, foam rolling, where to include, um, you know, dynamic, let's say dynamic stretching, mobility, etc. Like, what would kind of your key workout day look like start to finish?
So I would say like in a perfect world, and there's also like kind of like if you're 100% healthy versus
Mm.
if you're kind of managing some chronic sorts of things, which a lot of us are. Um, but let's say you're pretty healthy, but say you're
Yeah.
like healthy average Joe who has like a job, right? That's probably a lot of us. I would say you want to start off with mobility, right? So you want to like do some, especially if you've been sitting at your desk doing some hip stretching, kind of just like loosening up those hips, getting things moving. Glute activation is always a good thing to do in the modern day and age. They like 80% of injuries some kind of under functioning glutes. And would do like a long warm up,
No.
get into the workout, post workout, like slower static stretching and foam rolling. Um, be a good way to kind of, and if you do have some areas that like to be a little bit more pesky, then that's when I would also do a little bit of like the pre rolling.
Okay, got it. Um, I'm going to ask this with many of the different modalities we get through, but any kind of warnings, things like to make sure not to do with the foam roll.
Yeah, that's a good question. So foam roller, it's a little bit hard to overdo it with. Like I said, when my comments kind of mentioned like the scraper, um,
Yeah.
lacrosse ball. I have seen like a number of patients who really get after. Like you can overdo it. It's harder to do foam roller. I would say it's not impossible to do with the foam roller, but the foam roller is just a little bit more broad. It's not quite as targeted, but like you can if you like go to town on like an acutely injured spot, you really do too much. And that can make it a little bit more flared up, a little bit more irritated. Um, so it's important to, consult with your PT, kind of figure out where in the healing process you are. Also, that's also I typically say like go a little bit fuller, lighter, quicker before. And if you are really going to get to this, I would wait for after. But sometimes like really attacking before a hard workout, putting that stress on the hard workout can also be relatively a little bit too much.
Got it. Um, Perfect. I think this is a great transition because when I think about the foam roller in particular, this next thing I want to talk about is kind of the massage, the now very popular massage gun, which
Uh-huh.
I see, and I'll be curious your opinion because it'll be much more much more appropriate. Where
Yeah.
people have started like interchanging these items, and I know you mentioned in terms of like bringing blood flow to the area, as my at least my understanding is sort of the same rationale, but these guns have gotten very popular. So can kind of start there if that's all right, and just kind of say like from once again from an athlete, from a PT practitioner, how are you seeing these used? What are the perks? What are the cons? And where should we be kind of considering including this as part of a routine?
Yeah, that's great. Same thing. I have a lot of my patients like love their thing. love their hypervolts. This is also one point that I forgot to make foam rollers, but I really connects both the foam roller and is that it does um, help with our brains. Like, so if you have this area that's chronically tight, chronically a little bit tender, chronically, then part of what happens is the feedback between your brain and that part of your body, like the pain receptors, get overactive. Your brain will start to register kind of like a little bit of like a tap will start to feel more like a stab, right? So like that hypersensitization. Foam rollers can help to sort of down regulate the nervous system, sort of help us like reestablish the bar for what is the right amount of like pain registering if that is a little bit up. And I think that the hypervolt does an even better job of that. The vibration give the brain a little um, different type of input and almost like, if you will, like a where it's not being constantly kind of stimulated by that like pain feeling, and that can help to reset the nervous system. I would say it's more about the system than it is like if it's actually like physiologically like anything. But by regulating the nervous system, that can that chronically tight muscle to kind of relax and like release a little bit.
Got it. So, question from now, just the dumb
Hmm.
runner guy that I have been for so long. It's would one necessarily replace the other, or do both of them have this place in their in your routine?
I would kind of lean towards like if you're gonna pick one or the other, I still think the foam roller is a little more effective because you can, for like a quad or a calf or something, you can really get your body weight on there, leverage, and get more of the compression, more of like the arguable like physical changes from the foam roller that I don't think can do quite as good a job of with the hypervolt. Um, but it's all about like compliance, right? And if it's easier for you to hypervolt and use that ball, it's a little more passive. You're like, laying on your couch, then that's definitely better than from a recovery of.
Perfect. I would agree in general, but it's, I to your point, it's going to be always different strokes for different folks here. I think this transitions well. So the next kind of thing I wanted to bring up is compression. Compression has been around for a long time. Certainly, as many other things now, bigger than ever. And I think we see them in a couple ways often. We see like the compression socks or tights, which are a little bit easier to, a little bit more like affordable. And then we see very popular compression boots that now are made by multiple different people.
Mhm.
So we'll kind of start broad topic on compression because we've heard you just mentioned being able to use the foam roller to create compression. But in terms of compression therapy, any kind of overarching thoughts and feelings on its value, its lack of value, etc.
Compression is one of the things that's actually kind of across the board a pretty thumbs up, as far as helpful, not harmful. I think again you could argue like varying degrees of how much it really helps, but I would say like a good just kind of green blanket statement is like compression is good. And there is a number of like articles and research that does support its help in recovery. Um,
Great.
yeah.
So within the compression, then let's break it down a little. Like within compression, we've got the compression sock, and that which is one level, and then there's the compression boot. So one question that came in, I think it's an interesting way to at least like kick it off. And I've certainly gotten a lot as a coach. I'm sure you've gotten it from many many different angles. It's like at what level are the boots worth it? And or like at what level of your training, how deep at a certain point should you be incorporating, that kind of level of compression therapy?
Yeah, by like what level or like what level of like difficult training or like what level of
I think so. Yeah, exactly right.
okay. Yeah, I think you know, anything where you're like volume or intensity, like if you're easy running 3 to 4 times a week, 30 to 45 minutes, probably don't really need them. If you're marathon training, going out on mile run, yes. You know, I think that they definitely have value. Also, after a hard interval workout, go run type of thing. Um, a way to put it is like call like a very long walk for me. I think you've heard this before, but like a very long walk is Normatec. Um, but we're busy, right? Like I go spend 3 hours running, I really want to go walk for an hour, flush out my body. If I could sit, kick back on my couch and zip on my boots and like read a book or take a wow, the boots do the job for me. Um, for a lot of us, we would lean towards the boots as a passive way to get it act right. Because when if you go jump on your, spin for an hour, super, super low resistance, you'll probably get bits of those muscles still moving, which is again like what I said earlier. When you're exerting yourself, all of the blood to your extremities. Once we stop, everything has to go against gravity to get back to our heart. That's where we kind of think pull and the compression do that for us. Um,
Yeah, I will just say I've been fortunate enough. I think I had like the original Normatec. It was
uh,
something, an indulgence for myself. So I've always been a fan. Certainly, when people have asked me like if I recommend them, I'm like, well, yeah, they're great, but I'm not really sure. There's like nothing I get that I can't do with a foam roller. So to your point, it's excellent to be able to be watching television, be on my laptop, have the boots on. Um, and like I said, I enjoy every second of it, but it is interesting. That's why I was very curious. Just I've done a little bit of study. I'm sure you've done it on like really what that benefit is, and ultimately, I would say like, is it worth it? Is
mhm,
kind of depends.
mhm. Yeah. Here's a question for you. Like, do you notice a difference personally if you do a longer, harder workout, get in the after, and how you feel the next day than them and don't?
That's a great question. Um, I don't really know the answer. I think I'm trying to think back over time, and probably not. But I do enjoy my time.
See, I would say the opposite. Like my, personal study of myself when I'm like marathon training and do
Yeah.
like hard run, I find if I like, and I notice like a proximity thing. Like if I run in the morning and do the boots in the evening, then it's like less apparent. But if I like
Mm,
I run, shower, get direct, then I feel like I notice enough of a difference on like how I feel the next day.
yeah.
Um, yeah, it's my anecdotal kind of what I've felt. But it could be a like that, and I take a hot bath, right? In the hot water, also circulation. I get my protein shake away, the immediate like refueling, so, like do all those things in combo of like hot water, water compression, protein, like immediately like get those protein and the carbs in to help your body recover, and you do the boots, then like, it's I can't say for sure it's the boots.
Yeah, I will just say as well too. I've been a huge fan of compression for a long time. I've seen the naysayers. I like have compression ankles, like calf sleeves and then socks. I just for me and what I did notice exactly to your point is I would come finish my longest workouts. I would come home, I would shower, and I immediately put those compression socks on.
Hmm.
And I've always had, that like I've had a bizarre schedule for my entire life career. So I finish my long runs and I don't go into my weekend. I finish my long runs and I have like 30 minutes until I start work, and where I'll be working for many many hours to follow. So to your point, I actually haven't quite gone that route. So the compression socks have always been so useful for me because I just slip them on. And I will say, absolutely, I notice a difference in just like how my legs feel from that. So that I've, a lot of times recommended something very similar to that of like finish that workout, especially the hard workout, go straight into compression, even
Hmm.
though it's not always something that I, as an athlete, have been able to do. So it is funny. I think actually just a great point made of these things are just so different to different people, right? We're all like a little bit different, and one thing's going to work and resonate. Like I have always loved the compression boots. We gave them to a friend of ours who we thought it was going to be a nice gesture to borrow ours for a while. He hated them so much he immediately returned them to us. We were like, I just, I don't understand. So it all things worth experimentation here.
Um,
So we'll kind of leave compression alone here, but what you actually mentioned is a nice segue is using water compression. Also, you mentioned hot water, but kind of want to start with cold therapy, which I think is probably the trend that is most trending at the moment of like cold therapy, cold plunging, but just things to include in cold therapy in general. Cold plunge, cryotherapy, which has been around for a little bit longer, maybe potentially, and then just traditional icing. So, any overall thoughts on kind of cold therapy treatment?
Yeah, so there's different ways to look at it, right? There's like the ice bath of like, okay, I did a hard workout, back to like what we did in college, back before we had any sort of other stuff. It was like cold tub. And that is what we had. Cold tubs and foam rollers. No hypervolts, no infrared sauna, no cryo chambers, we didn't have any of that back in the day, back in my day, which was not that long ago, but maybe it is long ago. I'm getting old. Um, yeah. So there's definitely kind of again debatable, right? Everything's a little bit debatable of the kind of systemic like inflammatory effects, how the cold help decrease inflammation. The cold does not speed up healing. What it does potentially is actually like kind of halt the breakdown process. So that's why it's kind of transitioned to be a little bit out of vogue to use the cold for like recovery. And I think it's not a huge amount, but even like professional athletes, you want every little bit of breakdown and soreness possible in because that's going to allow your body to kind of hyper the muscles more, build the bones more, basically more for the workout, so that like in a few days you're stronger for the next effort, or over time, you're kind of getting more breakdown, more rebuild, more adaptation. So like as you're training, you're going up, and the cold can like make that a little less.
Hmm.
Uh, I still Well, this is a tangent, which is like icing if you twist your ankle or something like that. That's still like if you have an acute fall or put ice on it. That's good. Um, Now kind of with the cold plunge and the cryotherapy, I was just talking with a coworker about this yesterday, actually, after you and I were talking. More of the research is kind of putting it towards like increases your brain's like dopamine production. So you get like a little bit of like a dopamine rush, which is good for just like mood and brain chemistry and things like that. And that dopamine can be what's the word I'm looking for?
What about
Like
placebo?
or like analgesic, right? So
Okay.
don't feel pain as much. So that in that sense too, if you're feeling better, less pain, will that help um, to release like chronic tension? Like again, if we're sore and tight and we're stiff, kind of walking around, guarding a little bit more, our sympathetic nervous system is going to stay more upregulated. A lot of recovery tools are really aimed at helping the body transition from like the sympathetic fight or flight, go doing a workout mode to more of like the parasympathetic rest and digest. I want to calm down, you know?
Hmm.
And so the cold one, one of those tools.
Yeah, I agree. So I mean, icing used to be everything, right? I finished long hard workouts, everything hurt, pack my body in ice, jump into ice baths,
Yeah.
and yeah, it absolutely has gone out of vogue for the exact reasons you just said, which ultimately it stunts the actual recovery process, does reduce inflammation, but the inflammation is certainly our body's way of sending blood, fresh blood to an area and actually making that recovery happen. So that being said, like I am a cold plunge fan, but I don't like to do it post workout. It's sort of how I feel with a lot of like kind of little recovery hacks in general. Like post workout, I want to give my body, I want to do kind of what you said actually with like I want to go into my recovery long cool down. I want to make sure I'm getting like my nutrition in to refill my body, and then I want to give like as long as humanly possible. And then when I'm kind of separated from that workout and things have calmed down, like I actually do enjoy like that cold plunge, especially if I can like alternate it with cold and hot. I don't
Yeah.
use it as much for I think athletic recovery is just like general enjoyment, but it so where I told Emmy, I was like, we're not going to go into the Wim Hof method of like cold water treatment versus hot versus the the whole thing. Is that'll for a different day and at least a different conversationalist on my end. But I do understand a lot of the research on that cold therapy. But as discussed, for me, it's I want athletes not to be, if they do it to separate it substantially from their workouts, shouldn't be something you're jumping in straight into that kind of cold, icy water when your body, especially like really like cooling down. You mentioned back in college, I was thinking about obviously pretty hot down there in Louisiana as well. And the last thing I would ask anybody to do now is like finish a big hard workout and then plunge themselves into ice cold water.
Right.
The hot bath, a little bit different scenario. I would say absolutely go get into that hot bath.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so I mentioned, cold there. I know you actually, worked in a place with cryotherapy chamber too. So for a little while, um, I don't. Did you ever kind of experiment much with it? See like successes versus failures versus etc.
Yeah, I think the benefit of cryo too, it's I think you could argue the case for either or, the years of cryotherapy will definitely have a whole bunch of reasons why cryo plunge. I think if anything, the cryo is just like a little more efficient and there for like 2 minutes versus more like 10 for a cold plunge.
Mhm.
Um, but the same thing, right? You're kind of like regulating your nervous system. There's a little more honest, like there's a little more risk with the cryo because it is such a really, really, really cold. Like you can potentially get frostbite and things like a little bit more that
Yep.
is to get with the cold plunge. Um, but and this back to your point, like probably like the gold kind of like this hot cold therapy stuff is that alternation where if you can pair the hot and the cold, right? So you're in a and then you get into a cold plunge and back into the hot tub. You're like, my favorite is like when I'm skiing in the hot tub and then
Yes.
roll around in the snow and then jump back. Body is kind of tingly. It's for sure doing something. And the cryo kind of what both the cryo and the cold plunge, the opposite of what we were talking about with like when you run all the fluid against your extremities, it kind of shunts back to your core because you're in such a cold you know, cryo or water. So all your blood goes back to your heart, kind of gets oxygenated, and then it will eventually make your extremities. So that can also help with like overall recovery and blood flow. And if you see that hot cold contrast, getting kind of the blood flowing out, blood flowing back in, blood flowing back out, blood flowing back in. Movement of blood is always a good thing. And contrary to like what we would think, like not all parts of our body get great circulation times evenly. So doing these modes kind of help with that. A good thing to do.
Fair. Before we jump into this final thing here, are there just kind of looking back on kind of compression, cold therapy? Are there any like times you're using them as like recommended treatment for your patients?
Um, Specific to cold therapy.
Or cold therapy, I kind of skip. I should have asked with like compression or cold therapy. Like, are they modalities that you kind of as a duo or individually? Like, do you feel like you're often recommending them or almost no?
Um, I don't recommend cold therapy often. Um, if anything, again, kind of what we're talking about with that like uptick in um if it feels good to ice it, go for it. You're probably not doing that much harm. If anything, but you're numbing it, right? You're like halting the pain reception. So then as the numbness wears off, it might not be as upticked. If you feel like cryo is beneficial in helping your recovery and you do feel good, like go for it. Um, With compression, I think there was a comment earlier about kind of like the use of like some chronic like ankle stuff and calf stuff.
Hmm.
I think the like compressed calf sleeves are great if you've been struggling with like chronic ankle. And there is some decent research that supports that, like wearing your compression socks post workout if chronic Achilles issues or things like that can help you speed up recovery. And then during workouts, it's more of a analgesic like pain reduction thing where just like you have that compression sock on, you feel a little bit more supported, more secure, and you might have like a decreased perceived pain. So I probably recommend compression socks more frequently than I do ice, and like specifically for kind of full foot calf issues.
Got it. Amazing. And then kind of the last modality I wanted to touch on here is kind of the like we've mentioned a couple times now, like sauna or infrared sauna slash red light, which is a little bit different, but we're going to lump it in together here of like kind of infrared slash heat slash sauna.
Yeah.
Um, few different ways it's like presented to athletes these days, but once again, anything worth incorporating into a fitness routine or a recovery routine, anything to be thoughtful of when, kind of figuring out where to put it.
I actually, I'm very curious and I haven't had a chance to research this as extensively as I like, but I am curious as to the like the benefits of like infrared sauna compared to like a traditional sauna. Do you know anything? Can you speak to that at all?
A little bit, I can speak with being very far from Xers. My understanding of infrared is that technically the idea is that kind of like heats your body from the inside out as opposed to kind of outside in. So usually the infrared is like a lower temperature point than the sauna.
Mhm.
Um, because the one thing, the sauna, like what I've usually used it for athletes is not so much recovery because it is an extra stressor to the body. What I've used it for athletes is heat acclimation
Yeah.
protocols, which especially I had an ultra runner that was going to elevation and was going to be out in the sun, yada yada yada. So we were looking at sauna protocols for heat acclimation. In that
Yeah.
scenario, we wanted traditional sauna, a little bit higher impact, but it kind of with that thought process, it's an additional stressor on the body. So where I would have to where I don't know really is maybe certainly a lower temperature on the infrared,
Mhm.
potentially a little bit less of a stressor with a
Yeah.
similar upside benefit. Um, but it's one for me that it's nice to sit in, but I've never really used it personally for recovery. I've used it for attempted heat attempted heat acclimation, and that's how I've used it for athletes as well.
And like this comment we just got, right? Like if infrared is more comfortable for the athlete,
Yeah,
then effective, right? So maybe there you could argue that it's inconclusive or they, outside in, inside out, can you really prove that? But a lower temperature, right? So if you're able to, because there is like, in pregnant women, things that like you don't want your body to be put like you're when you have
sure,
a that's your body trying to like kill stuff and cook yourself, like it's not you don't want to be in like, extreme heat. So if you're able to get similar benefits to a traditional sauna at a lower temperature, then it's probably better if it's more comfortable to you, if you're able to stay in there longer, if you're not losing quite as much fluid, then it makes sense. Like it's almost just like technology is always like we have carbon shoes we didn't used to. Like infrared is the kind of newer version of the sauna that's a little bit better, a little bit more efficient, a little bit less stress on the body. I honestly like I need to research that a little bit better. I don't know about the
yeah,
kind of infrared.
fair. Which is okay. Yeah, I listen. For me, it's only been in a matter of a heat acclimation protocol of using it, and I think the kind of interesting thing of talking about all these things, right, is like the research is all over the place. Like you can find the research you want to support the answer you want to find, and it's not very hard to do so. So that's why I mentioned I think you're in such a unique position as both a coach, an athlete, and a physical therapist that you not only get to like kind of learn about these things, hear about these things, but also like see how people are utilizing them and
Yeah,
then kind of get that feedback of like, is it working? Is it like we know that these things do work? These things like we are talking like where we started on foam rolling. You said you're a big believer, or like compression. These are things that we do use very often to for A, B, and C. But we get into some of these things that have just like developed this fast trendiness, and I think those in particular really like with the cold plunge therapy and cold therapy, the hot and infrared therapy. They're like super new onto the marketplace. I haven't seen too much proof to really back them up. But then on the flip side, another thing you mentioned, I think is so critical in this space is like if it works for you, then great. Like, if you do it and you walk away and feel better, then absolutely, that's a win. And then it really just comes down to, well, like what's the time, the effort, and the way that these things are going now, the finances to like, kind of hit that break even point.
totally. I I agree with that. I definitely have seen the sauna used very effectively for the heat that you're talking about, and I think there is some pretty good evidence to support that. Um, and even like in the winter when it's really cold all the time, it's great to just like sweat. It's a little bit
Yeah.
harder, more of an outdoor runner, and you're not sweating that much. Like sweating releases of toxins, so just going and sitting there and like getting kind of the bad stuff out your body and like watching it kind of come out of every pore, I think is helpful. I would even do some of my rehab exercises in the sauna, metric bridges, and just like that hot environment. Um, so I think there's multitude of things that you could argue it's good for.
Fair. Well, a couple quick questions here. I think this is a great one, actually, especially after all this conversation and kind of loops us back to the beginning, which is I think this is where we find a lot of people and ourselves sometimes is so if I only have 5 to 10 minutes after a run, and of
Uh,
course, it's basically what should that routine look like?
um, well, I would say first of all, probably around and then extra minutes before you're off to work or whatever. Um, then I would say, I would honestly, I would do a little bit more like slower stretching, and then foam rolling is really good. You could do that potentially like later in the day. Have time right then if you wanted to. Like, I would say like ideally you foam roll and you stretch, but if you have 5 minutes, maybe like slower static stretching, and then do you have a break between meetings, or do you have 10 minutes to kind of like lay down with the foam roller and do a little bit of work then?
Got it. Well, I fully paraphrase this question because I wanted to like that question, but then her actual question here was, so if you also only have a few minutes after you finish running, which is best to use on a kind of trouble area, ice or heat? Which I think we touched on a little bit, but I think let's loop back one more time here.
Yeah, I would say probably heat unless it's very acute. Like if you twisted your ankle on your and it's kind of starting to swell up. If it's like, oh, my calf is always really tight, my Achilles is sore, um, lean more towards for kind of loosening things up. Versus if it's very new or acute to the ice. Although I did have like one who chronic Achilles stuff, and she started doing like ice after all her runs off the ice bucket, and she swears that like that got her over the hump. So there's all
It's yeah, we're different strokes, different folks. We'll do a couple of rapid fires here. I know Oliver's been he asked both in advance and again now. We talked about hot sauna, hot, but what about just kind of hot baths, especially like with Epsom salt?
I am a big believer. I am very pro hot bath. I use that a ton for myself. It's really helped in my recovery. I think the Epsom salts are, like, a little bit debatable. Like, I don't know for sure if you, like, need the Epsom salts or if you get the same benefits with just a hot soak, but the Epsom salts certainly is my
Yeah, I same love a hot soak. I think it probably cures 90% of the stuff that we've like talked about here. You still have to do stretching, still have to do those foam rolling things, those manual muscle manipulations, but I'll take that a hot soak. And the idea with the Epsom salt is it can like pull a little bit more of the toxins from your body in a different way. But what Emmy was talking about from the sauna, whether or not it works, TBD, probably a little bit better than nothing. But the hot soak would be what I would prioritize in that.
I bring
Oh.
my scraper tool into the hot soak, and I'm, like, scraping my scraping I'm traveling, I'll use it like the blunt of a butter knife, but, like, that's, like honestly, I've been struggling with the hamstring thing for a while. That's, like, after my workouts, I get in there and I out in the hot water, and I've been, like, able to pick up a lot recently.
Sure. Yeah, we used to keep a little plastic cup, like a silicone cupping cup, in our shower to just kind of like work down the leg a little bit.
Totally,
Same
cups
thing.
is also a great hack. If you do cupping therapy, soap and
Mhm.
water, you can kinda slide those around on tight areas. That's also great.
One here, I think help for heavy legs. How to know when it's because you're loading your legs in a marathon block and it's normal, or if you need more recovery. Also, is spinning out the legs on the bike after a workout, or I guess, or maybe even day after a workout, a good effective thing to get rid of lactic acid buildup in the muscles.
I think so. Yeah, I think, but you gotta be careful that you're able to, like, control yourself. I definitely see some of the athletes I work with who are just really bad at taking it easy. Even if every intention of taking it easy, they'll still end up pushing it a little bit. Um,
Yeah.
so just, like, being really diligent about very low resistance, just, like, kind of the movement, blood flow recovery, and not feeling like you need to, like, crank it up a little bit. You don't do a class. I would say don't do a class, put on, like, a boring podcast,
Yeah.
spin
It's
it
great.
out. What was
That's what I feel like I see the exact same thing. It's I always like many people have probably who are will listen to this have heard me say many times before, like there is no such thing as like a recovery run or a recovery ride. You're either working out or you're not working out. So it doesn't mean you can't flush lactic acid, but so easy to miss the mark. It's not even really a zone 2 hardly. It's like a zone 1, maybe low zone 2, not very long. And so, if you miss the mark, you miss the mark, and it took you down a peg as opposed to assisting in any way that part of the process. So
like
more times than not, I'm like, just take the rest.
it's like so easy to overdo it and impossible to underdo it. Like on, recovery runs, recovery rides, like it's almost impossible to go too slow, but like very easily go a little too hard. So like when in doubt, go and you're still
Yeah.
gonna and that's kind of to like the first part of your question is like, what are and that's I think where you can that's something you're struggling with, like that's where you probably who can help you look at your training, look at performance, and kind of make sure, like, yeah, I want you to go into this workout. I want your legs to feel. That is the purpose of this workout. We are a lot of the marathon. Your legs are going to you to feel that in this work versus like if it's a shorter, quicker, hitting that with heavier legs, then unproductive, right? But that can be distinguished on your own, and that's where I think work someone outside of your own head help you sort of learn what's appropriate, what's not, what's good, what's too much, what's not enough. You know, that's so that oftentimes for us to kind of calculate. That's why all the pros have coaches, you know,
Oh yeah,
love
sure.
words like because of for that, it's hard.
I remember Matt many years ago to me when we started doing this together. It was like he was like, don't think because you're a good coach, you're gonna be a good runner. He was like, "Cause you're gonna spend all your time coaching," and boy was he right. But there's a joy to it all. And the final thing I was going to add, just kind of want you to chime in here, because it said for the help in the heavy legs and especially in the marathon block, but any block, general fitness, 5K, 10K, whatever.
Mm.
I feel like 99 times out of 100, and the second part of this question gives me a chuckle because it's going to go into what I'm talking about, is that it's just all too much. It's that you're either running too much, you're adding too much supplemental on, or then I think probably the number one is that the runs are too hard. So that the easy runs, which should constitute about like 80, 90% of your schedule, are missing the mark. The recovery days that should be so easy, 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 that they're too much, and your body starts to accumulate that fatigue. So it's funny, we spent, the recovery market, as I mentioned, is huge now, but I don't know, it's like what the final 1/10 of the pie. It's like if you're doing 90% of things right, then these little things start to like really make a difference. But if you kind of skip, miss out on that first 90%, there's no way of like recovering your way back. So I don't know. I mean, I'm curious now, obviously, like from your coaching experience, when people come in and are like just have this residual fatigue, where you feel like it most originates.
Yeah, I think too, like, we spent the entire 45 minutes about like fancy tools and things for recovery, which is so much of that marketing and capital, like industry and economics, because like the things like kind of we got to go back to, and actually maybe we should have talked about this at the beginning, or maybe this is a really good with like the simplest things, like the unfancy, like what have we said before, like no one makes money off of people sleeping more. In fact, that drains the economy, but like probably the number one thing you need to do that than any recovery tool out there is sleep, right? Prioritizing sleep, getting good sleep, like that. So like those foundational rocks, which to me, kind of the three foundational rocks are sleeping, nutrition, and fueling, protein, and making sure you're getting enough protein, um, and strength training to supplement your training, like your training. So like making sure, especially as we get older, making sure you're lifting weights and doing strength, making sure you're fueling properly pre, especially post, and then prioritizing sleep, which are less expensive.
Well, they are sometimes hard to do still, but yes, they're for sure. Well, I think that's probably a perfect spot to end it, actually. So, Emmy, thank you as always. Always appreciate the time. Always a pleasure to chat. Thanks so much for everyone for coming and participating and sending questions in advance. For people watching this later, hope we hope we were helpful, and we'll see everyone back here very soon. But see you later.
Awesome. Thanks, John.